reports after the game, Quincy, a lot of outlets pounced on this and said that they believe, barring anything catastrophic, that they fully expect Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry to be back in their respective positions after the season. You know, after a game like that against Pittsburgh, it could have went left, especially given the fact how many people have been fired for the organization after losing to Pittsburgh. But where do you see this thing? Do you see Kevin Stefanski? Because they've been presenting this thing as in lockstep. When you hear Stefanski, you hear Berry. When you see Berry, you hear Stefanski. A, do you believe that is the way it goes down? And do you believe that in this situation they are kind of tied at the hip? And then the second question I'm going to ask you is, if they are given the vote of confidence in saying that they'll be back and it seems like they're going to be able to retain their jobs, does that make you believe that everybody in the organization, including ownership, scouting, coaching staff, was on board with Deshaun Watson, and when that went left, they got a mulligan for that?
I think that's been true, right? And it's easy to like wonder if it's true now, right? But if we go back to when the trade happened, yeah, everybody was behind it, right? Like it makes sense that
other teams was behind behind it.
12 teams were behind it, right? Like it seems like this crazy idea now, but you go back to when the Browns made that trade. I mean, they were seen as the winners of the Deshaun Watson sweepstakes. So yeah, I have no trouble believing that everybody was in it, but the product that you got was so far away from whatever you thought you were getting that it's hard for me to be like, oh yeah, it's your fault. It's like they got scammed, right? Like they thought they was buying a MacBook and then like, you know, they got a Chromebook in the mail or something. Like it's like, damn, like
you got a jailbroke Fire Stick. This ain't no MacBook. What is this?
They got robbed by Best Buy. Like, and you thought you was at Best Buy. Like you was buying the official. Like, how can you be mad at that, right? Or at least blame yourself for that. But when it comes to Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski, one thing I said Kevin had to prove was, hey, if you're going to say the win-loss record is a result of wanting to be definitive on this whole Deshaun Watson thing before you pull the plug, so you let him stay out there longer than he should have, just so you could be sure that there's nothing left there, right? Before you decide to pull the plug on a $230 million quarterback. If you are going to make that argument, you have to make a compelling argument that literally anybody else could be your starting quarterback and you get better performance. And they've successfully done that. Jameis Winston is top 11 in the NFL in PFF grade, in top 10 in the NFL in QBR right now since week 8. If you look at passing yards, Jameis Winston is number 2 in the league since week 8. Keep in mind, it was a bye week there. So people are going to say it's Thursday night. He got an extra game in, but there was a bye week there. So he's on even footing with all of these guys. He's 2nd in the league in passing yards. He's 5th in the league in first downs. Deshaun was in the bottom of the league at both of those numbers. And we could say, oh, the offensive line took Deshaun Watson, right? That's the argument that I heard people make. It's a good argument. But let's be honest, that same offensive line is blocking for Jameis Winston right now, right?
Playing a little bit. They're playing a little bit. And,
hey,
and look,
we can say
Wilson's been out, and they just lost DeJuan Jones.
Yeah, right? They had Jermaine Ifedi playing left tackle for the first time in his life. And it looked better, right? You can say, oh, it's the wide receivers that failed Deshaun Watson, right? But Jameis is doing this with the wide receiving core that has one less Amari Cooper. So, like, every argument that you could have blamed this on to make it seem like, oh, yeah, it's not Deshaun, it's the team around him. Well, it doesn't explain the success that Jameis Winston is having. And I would argue, G, he's doing this with a worse play caller in Ken Dorsey, because sometimes Ken Dorsey be calling these plays. And I'm like, well, I don't understand why we would do that. And it's not even like the run pass stuff. It's like, oh, yeah, he runs a play on 3rd and 9 where one route goes above the sticks, but none of these routes are made to, like, you know, if you want to, I don't mind throwing something, like if it's 3rd and 8 and you throw something 5 yards before the marker. I don't mind that as long as you have sufficient leverage to create a run lane for somebody. And sometimes he'll call plays where it's like
drag or a rub underneath when you catch it with the track running, right?
Yeah,
you know
like when you do that. But sometimes he's not doing that. I think Kevin is in my opinion, like clearly the superior play caller, right? But I think they're letting Ken kind of figure it out here. I think they're just doing him a solid because it's kind of obvious that they probably gonna move on from Ken, despite him not really doing a fireable job, right? Like, but they might have to move on. So I guess they're doing him a solid. Kevin is real good with that with his coordinators. But yeah, I think Cav's proven what he has to do as long as they continue to look like this going forward. I mean, Jameis Winston in a blizzard was more productive than Deshaun Watson was in any individual game this season. That just is what it is. That's the truth right there.
What do you make of Andrew Berry? Because from what I'm hearing, a lot of people don't seem to have Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski on the same playing field. A lot of people are giving Andrew Berry more of the side eye on some of the moves. And if you poll people will usually, this may be just from the way I'm thinking, people say, hey, I like Kevin more than I would keep Kevin over AB. What's your assessment of that?
I think they work well together. I think they're more of, like you mentioned it, they're kind of a package deal, right? Like one comes with the other. I know somebody made the joke, if the Browns did fire Andrew Berry, Kevin Stefanski, Philadelphia would definitely just end up with both of them in some way, right? So it'll probably work out for him, right? But I think what Andrew Berry has done well, right? If you just look at his drafting history, it's, I would say, average draft history, right? He has some hits, he has some misses. He hasn't really knocked one out the park in the first round, but he's knocked a couple of second and third rounders and fourth rounders out the park enough to where you're like, okay, well, the team's not talent deficient when it comes to young players. You're not looking at the guys under 25 and thinking, oh man, we got nobody here to go to. We don't have the deepest roster, right? We definitely need those first round picks these next few years to hit for this team. But you're not deplete of talent. And where I think Andrew shines the most is his cap maneuvering and his trades. We don't know who's responsible for the Deshaun Watson trade at the end of the day, right? That's kind of a big enough trade to where it's not under the exact purview of just one guy in Andrew Berry. But if we look at the smaller trades where he does have more say, hey, that Amari Cooper trade, smacker of a trade. You got 2 1,200-yard seasons, and then you gave him back for a third-round pick. That's a W right there for Andrew Berry. You look at that Jerry Jeudy trade and extension. That looks like a really good move, right? David Njoku, that extension looks like a really good move. Yeah, you can point to the Dustin Hopkins extension, not feeling great right now about that one. But for the most part, most of these extensions, like even the Jack Conklin extension, which we was like kind of side-eyeing that. Thank God they did that, right?
And he hasn't been bad the last couple of weeks.
He's been the best offensive lineman they got for a while now since he's come back. So yeah, I think Andrew, the work that he does, I think he's really good at the cap stuff. The fact that we haven't had to lose significant players because of the salary cap, even while maneuvering around this Deshaun thing, in the next few years are going to be the test, because I think it's obvious they got to move on from Deshaun, and it's going to be awkward. He's going to be paid a lot of money to not play, and how you maneuver that and work that out with restructures. But I think if he works himself out of that, which I see a clear path for him to do, that's a very valuable thing for this team. Like, how many times have we seen good Browns players leave? Guys like JOK in years past, guys like Grant Delpit in years past would have slipped through the cracks because the Browns did something with contracts that's not as elaborate as the Deshaun Watson one. The fact that they've been able to to work around this contract while not losing any players that everybody thought that they were going to lose, also bringing in players at good deals like Jerry Jeudy, I think that's a win for them. The Miles extension, that was a huge win for them. They got him under the market, right? Like, somehow. And that contract has been such a beauty, and we haven't even thought about it since he signed it, right?
45, I think.
Yeah, I think he's only owed like $15 million next year. Like, it's a beauty of a contract there. Like, that's the kind of stuff that I think Andrew Berry is really good at. I think the drafting we'll get to know over the next couple of years, because while the drafts have been, I think, average over the last 4 years, I have to be fair. Like, he hasn't had the craziest pick selection out of all of it. There's one of those years without a second round pick. But 2 of those years are without a second round pick, and then 1 year with the second round pick. And when Mike Hall was out there, he looked pretty good. So we'll see. I think we're not going to really know what Andrew Berry is as a general manager when it comes to drafting for a couple more years. And I know that's frustrating for some people to hear, but it is what it is. I mean, like, just look at this 2023 class. He didn't have a first-round pick. He didn't have a second-round pick. But you might walk out of it with a left tackle starter in DeJuan Jones, Cedric Tillman, a starting wide receiver right there. DTR could be a backup, maybe. I don't know, but it's 5th-round pick at that point. There's somebody else in that 2023 draft. Like, Luke Whippler might end up being the starting center for you, right? So, and he was set to be the backup this year, right, behind Ethan Posick. So he was on a good track before he got hurt. If you get 3 starters out of a draft class where you didn't have a first or second round pick, that is a dub, like a giant dub right there. So we'll see. I think he does need to hit on his next first round pick this year. I think that needs to be a dub for them, like a big, obvious dub for everybody. And it will help to hit that same dub on that second round pick. Like the Browns, no matter how they finish the season, probably going to have a pick in the first half of the draft. And you want to make sure that they execute and do that well. But right now, I think Andrew has been good enough to where I don't feel like it's necessary to fire him. He hasn't been a disaster. He hasn't been the most amazing GM in the world. I would say he's above average. He's upper middle class when it comes to the general manager. I think these next draft classes will determine where he sits for the rest of his career. And then Andrew Berry, he's put himself in a class of rarefied air with those 2 Coach of the Year awards. The fact that he's won 11 games 2 times in Cleveland, which no coach has done. Even Bill Belichick was not able to do it, going all the way back to Marty Schottenheimer. So he's going to get a little bit of more. He's going to get more grace than Andrew Berry would. So, I think it makes sense to me because Kevin has accomplished, like he has the actual accomplishments. Andrew Berry has not made a pick yet, as solid as some of his picks have been, where you can put your foot in the ground, your stake there and say, that man hit a banker, right? Like the only reason I think people go as hard as they do for John Dorsey is that with those extra picks that he had in 2018, he hit bangers.
Yeah,
right? Like he got Nick Chubb and he got Denzel Ward. And say what you want, those were 2 bangers. Now, if he did not have those extra picks, we'd be talking about a draft class of Austin.
I think he drafted Bitonio too, didn't he?
No, he didn't do that. That was way before John Dorsey. Joe Bitonio was 2014. That was Ray Farmer that drafted Joe Bitonio.
Oh, he drafted Austin Corbett.
That's what it was. That's the thing. That's the thing, though. If he does not have those extra picks, which we're talking about a draft class where you take Austin Corbett and Baker Mayfield, right? Instead of Nick Chubb and potentially Josh Allen, right? So that's what Andrew Berry needs. He needs to get one of those core players on this team. One of the, like, Miles is one of the best players. You're not going to draft somebody better than Miles. But he does need to get somebody on this team that we could look at and go, that's one of the Browns' 5 best players that Andrew Berry is wholly responsible for. And I think that's why people aren't as behind Andrew as Kevin, because Kevin has that stuff you can grab. He has tangible accomplishments. Right now, Andrew Berry's accomplishments have to be explained. He needs one that kind of just is beyond explanation.